And everybody see the screen? Okay. Good. Just making sure. Hey, tell me if you guys can see the screen good.
I can.
I can see it just fine.
Okay, great. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get started, guys. I'm working on grading your tests. I was in Omaha all weekend, stayed pretty busy, so I'll get some of those done today and get them entered as soon as I get them done. So we're going to start module 19 today, probably go like 25 minutes, unless you guys have some questions or anything that kind of drags it out a little bit. But so today, obviously moving on from Hoover to the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, okay? And his inaugural address in 1933, okay? So he took office on March 4th. Remember, the 20th Amendment doesn't happen yet, the lame duck amendment. So he's inaugurated on March 4th, and obviously, guys, we're in the midst of the Depression, March 4th, 1933, and people are hungry for change. They're ready for maybe a president that is going to act more than Hoover did to try and relieve the pain of the Depression. So in this inaugural address, the famous words I'm sure you've all heard, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. This statement is one that says, look, we're in this together. We are going to try some new things. He's going to be calling it the New Deal. And this New Deal, I don't think Roosevelt really knew exactly what it was going to be when he took office. I mean, he had some ideas, but it's going to develop over time. It's going to evolve over time throughout the decade. Obviously, he's going to be elected president 4 times. Okay, and like Harding here, guys, we're going to take a little bit of a look at his cabinet. But more than just his cabinet, other advisors that really had the ear of the president during his almost over 13 years as president. Okay, so this, unlike the Harding administration, anybody recall what that was called? The Ohio Gang, right? Well, they're going to call this the Brain Trust. Okay, so obviously, it's the media that comes up with names like this. And as you will see, Roosevelt does have a fairly strong relationship with the press in this country during his time in office. Okay, he's from New York. He's a wealthy, New Yorker. I told you guys about John Garner will be his running mate from Texas to help him, win in the South. Which he does not have any trouble winning this election. So let's look at some of his advisors here. Okay, you've got Harold Ickes as the Secretary of the Interior. Easy way to remember that. And you guys saw on the first test, all these names. So far, what I've graded, most of you guys did well with the names. So you've got a lot of H's here. But Harold Ickes, Secretary of the Interior, Interior, and I don't know if you guys know what the Interior Secretary does, or the Department of Interior, but basically oversees the national parks, federal lands, and national forests, that sort of thing. Actually, we talked about this with Albert Fall from Harding's administration that went to jail. But anyhow, he's progressive. He's a former Republican. Henry A. Wallace, Secretary of Agriculture. Okay, his father had actually been the Secretary of Agriculture in earlier presidents, and he's also a former Republican. Now, Wallace is an important figure here because he is actually going to go on to be Roosevelt's second vice president for his second term and his third term. We'll talk more about him later, definitely policy-wise, but also ideologically wise. Okay, Wallace is, if you look back and read about him, he's really he is somewhat of a Marxist. He's got some very strong communist ideologies, which is why he will not remain as vice president for Roosevelt's fourth term. Okay, the Democratic Party is going to squash that. Okay, then Henry Morgenthau. This guy's going to play a vital role, especially early on with the banks. Okay, Morgenthau is a close friend and neighbor. He is awarded with this spot as Secretary of the Treasury, replacing Mellon, who had been in that post for about a decade, a little bit longer than a decade. Okay. Now, other than the name Francis Perkins, not starting with an H, what might be different about this person? Well, guys, if you look at the spelling of Francis there, generally this is how you spell the name Francis. That is a female Francis, because there are male Francis as well. In fact, she's the first ever woman cabinet member. Okay, Francis Perkins is, and I don't know if you guys remember studying from last year, Jane Addams and the Whole House. Jane Addams set up like a place for women, battered women that were on hard times, to help them, get through life and prosper. And that was called the Whole House. And so she started there and then went on to become the New York State Industrial Commissioner, and probably with some urging of the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, Francis Perkins was named to the cabinet. Okay. Other advisors. Looking here, guys, there's a good picture of Roosevelt and Harry Hopkins. Not so much looking for people that have been in Washington for years. They're looking for new ideas, looking for imagination. So young people, professors, college students, young people with bright minds like yourselves. One that's going to be very important is this man, Harry Hopkins. Okay, Hopkins, and you see him pictured here in 1945. Roosevelt will die in 45. Hopkins will be with Roosevelt through the entirety of his president. He has no official post. He's kind of like a chief of staff. I remember reading a biography by Winston Churchill a few years ago, and Churchill commented that, every time I wanted to talk to Roosevelt, I had to go through Hopkins first. So Hopkins was somebody that was very tight and will lead a lot of the New Deal programs. His ideas will be definitely used by Roosevelt. Okay, so professors, college graduates with the best minds. This informal group, as well as the cabinet, becomes known as the Brain Trust. And these New Deal programs, and guys, there's going to be a lot of them, are going to carry the imprint of these people. Okay, these ideas. Over here, I have this political cartoon. There's a lot of good political cartoons from this time period. So you can, I don't know how well you can see that, but bank legislation, his inaugural address, budget message, bank holiday, protection of gold, these sorts of things. One of the things Roosevelt said in his inauguration was that he hoped to deal out the cards so that every American had a better chance of getting a winning hand. Okay, and that's where this political cartoon comes from. And I believe I have a picture of Francis Perkins there, the first female cabinet member. Okay. All right, so with these next slides, I just want to talk a little bit about Roosevelt himself, the man. Okay. He is a somewhat of a controversial figure. Like I said, born into wealth in Hyde Park, New York. I mentioned his wife earlier, Eleanor Roosevelt. Well, actually, that was her maiden name. She shared the same last name. She didn't have to change it when they got married. They were cousins before throw up in your mouth or whatever. They were sixth cousins, okay, but actually grew up knowing each other and so forth. And you can see from the picture in the bottom middle there, Roosevelt, and this is in Washington, D.C., okay, here, is in a wheelchair, okay. And what a lot of people at the time did not realize, and I don't know about you guys in 2021 as high school seniors, did you guys know that Roosevelt was paralyzed from the waist down? Any of you guys know that? I don't know if you knew. But you can see he can drive because they fitted this car for him. He's a jovial person. He's a Harvard man. And some people predicted that as a politician, he was governor of New York first, that being this wealthy Harvard man, he would not be able to connect with the average American. They could not be further from the truth. Roosevelt was a great communicator and had kind of a unique voice. When we get back into class, I'll play you some audio from Roosevelt. But anyhow, he was stricken with polio in his 20s, and I don't know how much you guys have studied polio or know about it, but it was something that Americans really lived in fear of. Just kind of a personal story. My wife, her dad was born in Houston, and his grandfather, so her grandfather, they bought a place out by down by Galveston, like a lake house, and every summer they would send the kids off to the lake house just to get out of the city because people were worried about contracting polio. And if you could get away from other human beings, then you had a better chance of not getting it. But everybody would be affected differently by polio, but it could cause paralysis over most of the body for some people. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the iron lung, where people had to have help with breathing. And there were people that lived in these contraptions for decades, which allowed them to breathe, but they were paralyzed. Fortunately for Roosevelt, this was really from the waist down. Now, he could support the weight of his body. He had heavy braces on his legs. If he had something to hang on to or someone to hold on to, and this picture here, the back of a train, okay, this is his son, okay, who traveled with Roosevelt almost everywhere. And so that Roosevelt could stand. So in most pictures you see him, he's at a podium, something, if he's standing. As far as the wheelchair goes, guys, there were a lot of Americans that didn't know that their president was bound to a wheelchair. He asked the media not to photograph him in his wheelchair, or by this time with the motion picture camera to video him in his wheelchair, and they complied. In fact, it's very rare to see photographs of Roosevelt where the wheelchair is visible. They would also, I mean, I came across, I saw this on, I don't know, social media a couple of years ago. Somebody had like a 1 second clip of Roosevelt video in his wheelchair. And he was like passing through a hallway, down a hallway, and you could see him go by in his wheelchair. That's the only video I've ever seen of Roosevelt in his chair. So they complied. Roosevelt was a smoker, as everybody was. So, for instance, a lot of people didn't know that Barack Obama, and I know it's been a while since he was president, but a lot of people didn't know he was a smoker, okay, or is a smoker. And the media just didn't report on it. You can, figure out why. I mean, You know, if you can imagine if Donald Trump was a smoker, you think the media would highlight that, you know, but they didn't for Obama because they liked him. Okay. And obviously, smoking is something that's kind of taboo, and don't want to portray the guy they like in a negative light. Okay. A couple little other things, guys, that just on the personal level with Roosevelt. This is pretty well documented that Roosevelt did have a mistress um, that Eleanor, his wife, was aware of. Okay. And it is also genuinely thought by many that Eleanor was okay with this because Eleanor, at some point, um, she had a mistress of her own. And I think you probably heard that right, mistress. Okay. So it is believed that it's quite possible that Eleanor Roosevelt was a lesbian. In her later years. I don't know her personal story. She doesn't have memoirs on this or anything like that, but it's pretty well accepted that she was. Not that you need to know that. It's just kind of interesting. You know what I mean? So, all right. So, as a lot of our presidents have, guys, have had mistresses. We know this. Powerful men, you know, sometimes lose their way when it comes to fidelity. Okay. Next slide. Okay, this is a postage stamp. Forget what year this came out, but the stamp was only worth 32 cents. So I think this was in the 90s. But anyhow, this is what we're looking forward to, guys, with this new deal. You can see the TVA, the NRA, the CCC, the WPA, the FDIC, the SEC. There's many more. There's the PWA, the NYA, the AAA, and others. And guess what? We're going to learn them all. Okay. So, guys, obviously these programs that you may not be real familiar with yet are going to be expensive. Okay. The government is going to start doing more and more than it's ever done before. And so with the political cartoon here on the right, you can see Harry Hopkins here asking, they've spent $4,800,000,000, and Hopkins is more. These are the congressional cooks here, brewing up another $1.5 billion. Okay. And he's saying here, those who really need relief, and so forth. Okay, so this is pretty understandable cartoon there. Okay, all right. So moving forward, see here, the first 100 days. We were watching American Pickers last night on the History Channel, and they were running some advertisements for President's Day and some of the things. And one of the things they said, why does the media focus on the first 100 days of a president's administration? Well, it really does go back to Roosevelt. And what you're going to see here, guys, is an unprecedented amount of legislation going through Congress within the first 100 days. This is enormous. Nothing like this as we've ever seen before. Okay. One of the first things Congress does is they proposed the 20th Amendment. Okay. And you guys know this one from government class last year, known as the lame duck. So with Roosevelt, he will be inaugurated with his first term on March 4th. They will shorten the time period between the election and inauguration to January 20th. So on his second term and subsequent terms, he will be sworn in on January 20th. Okay, it will be inauguration day, and all presidents since. Okay. Okay, so let's get to work, because Congress certainly was. Okay, Congress was ready to sign just about anything. They were ready for change. They were ready for experiment. And one of the biggest issues facing the country was the banking crisis, right? All those bank failures that we saw in 1932 and 33. Okay, so on March 9th, this is just 5 days into his presidency, he calls for a nationwide bank holiday. Now, yesterday, President's Day, guys, was a bank holiday. That lasted for one day. Today, the banks are open because it's Fat Tuesday, okay? And so that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about a extended bank holiday where they're going to shut down the banks, okay? This passes within one day. It's proposed in the House, goes to the Senate, signed into law by Roosevelt all in one day, which is, well, that almost never happens, okay? So this is what it's called. The Emergency Banking Act is the bank holiday. They're the same thing, okay? Now, this is where Morgenthau, the new Secretary of Treasury, is going to shut down the banks across this country. Some of them will be reopened within days, but the Treasury Department, they will hire auditors, they will go in, investigate the banks, and then reopen them when they see fit, okay? Roosevelt gives the first of what become later known as his fireside chats, okay? Roosevelt would go on the radio to communicate with the American people. Hoover had access to the radio. He used it, but what Roosevelt did was like weekly addresses, okay? And remember, there's no television at this time. So what do people do when they go home from work or school? They go home, they're with their families, they read, okay? They write letters, they converse with each other, their faces are not in their phones, and that sort of thing. But by this time period, most Americans have one of these boxes in their house called the radio. And so when Roosevelt would give his addresses, they would be nationwide, and people would tune in and listen to the president. Okay. And so to make this kind of romantic, the media, historians dub these fireside chats, sitting around the living room with your family by the fire, listening to the President of the United States. Okay. Now, with this, he goes on to reassure Americans that, hey, we're shutting down the banks, we're sending them money, we are going to fix the banks, and you don't need to panic anymore about and worry about the banks. We got this under control. Okay. Now, there is a little bit of a constitutional issue here. And those of you that had government last semester understand, okay, the powers of the federal government to go into a private business, shut it down, investigate it, and open it only when they see fit. Does the federal government have this power? And I can answer that question. They don't. But the American people don't care. They want the banks fixed. This is a crisis, guys. When you talk about a crisis, people are willing to cede more power to government to cure the situation, to act on the crisis, okay? And we're going to see this over and over again with the New Deal, okay? That some of these actions taken by the government will be unconstitutional, okay? But in order for it to be deemed unconstitutional, it has to go through the courts, okay? And that takes a long time. So this is happening. It's happening now. It's happening 5 days into his presidency, and here we go, okay? So an examination of most of the banks showed that about 4/5 or 80% of the banks were in good conditions. I mean, already a quarter of the banks have failed. So obviously, most of them that were in really bad shape had already failed, okay? So you had about 20% that really needed help. So within a month, people started having confidence in the banking system again, okay? And so $1 billion worth of deposits were returned to banks. And by midsummer, 94% of the banks were reopened. So did this work? Well, yeah, I mean, it did. It like set up a system where the government, I mean, it sent literally printed money and sent it to the banks to kind of shore them up. And then Congress got busy on what was called the Glass-Steagall Act. Okay, this creates what you guys know as the FDIC. Okay, the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, is going to protect people's deposits in banks. Okay, up to $5,000. Okay, that's quite a bit of money back then. All right. So now you can only get this. There's a catch. If your bank wanted FDIC protection, it had to join the Federal Reserve. Okay, if you join the Federal Reserve and become a member bank, that means that the federal government can regulate you. Okay, so from here on out, we're going to see more regulatory work over banks as long as they're members of the Federal Reserve. Most banks today are. You can find some credit unions and so forth that are not members of the Federal Reserve, that do not have FDIC protection, that do not have the regulation that member banks do. Okay, but this starts to prevent wild speculation. That what that means is the run on the banks. So when people were freaking out that their money was going to disappear, they didn't have to worry about that anymore because they were putting the weight of the federal government behind you and protecting you up to $5,000. So today, that number, the FDIC actually protects deposits up to $250,000. Okay, it was $100,000 for a long time. It just went up a few years ago. So yeah, I mean, if you have the issue of having more than $250,000, you're going to want to put that in different banks. Not all have it in more than one. You're not going to want to have more than that in one bank, if that makes sense. Okay, and if that is an issue for you, see me when you come back to class, and we can talk about your test score. Kidding. Okay. All right. So this takes us really to the next slide, which is we're going to be talking about deflation and inflation, and I'm going to save that, guys, for tomorrow in class, because that's going to be something I really want to be able to write on the board with, and we're really going to hit some economics 101 here. Okay, so I appreciate the 5 of you that showed up this morning, and I'm also going to post an assignment. I don't know if I'll do that today, an assignment for this section. You guys probably have a lot of stuff with your other classes, so I'll probably hold off on that today, and I'm going to work on grading your tests. So hope you all have a good day. Stay warm, and we'll see you back at school on Ash Wednesday. They're doing mass before school if you want to go in the AC, and then also at lunch. And then any of you guys that missed the test, I'll be in my room at lunch for makeups for those of you that missed. And what else? Yeah, 11:15. Test makeup or mass if you want to go, or if you want to do both, you can go to mass at 7:15. All right, guys, have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.